Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek German King Tiger heavy tank. Since the last video update, a lot of progress has been made to the model's interior functions and layout, and we'll be touching upon and going over all of this information in this video. But before we can go ahead and do that, I think it will be best to first pop the roof off of this one. There we go. That makes it a lot easier. Let's go ahead and bring the camera in closer. To start this video off, we go back to the power supply that we have here. Like what was stated in an earlier video, the tank is 24 volt powered, and the way you achieve that is you take two 12 volt batteries and you hook them up in series circuit, thus giving you your 24 volts to operate the model. The batteries and the power supply have been discussed and assembled several videos back, but I had to go ahead and revisit this section over here to make some changes because since I made the first video, I've learned a lot more about these batteries and exactly how to charge them. And this trickles down into how they're hooked up, and we'll be touching upon that right now. You see, when I originally designed the system, I was utilizing my older style concept where you have the two batteries hooked up in series and you have a single charge jack. With a 24 volt charger, you could then charge the batteries. However, this is something that's proven to be a bit problematic. You see, you can't just charge the two batteries when they are hooked up in series. What eventually happens is that the one battery will charge up all the way. However, it will give a false reading to the charger saying that the batteries are fully topped off, when in actuality, only one of the batteries are charged while the other one is about 75 or possibly even half%. And because of this, what happens is that if you try driving the tank, your run times are going to be limited. So this was something that I wanted to address while working on this build over here. The best way, if you have a dual battery system to charge them, is you have to charge them independently. This way it ensures that each battery gets charged to its full capacity. What was also discussed in that earlier video was this little device that we have here, which is the battery kill switch. The purpose of this kill switch is to disable the batteries from the rest of the power supply, which will prevent any sort of battery drainage that can happen if you have the batteries hooked up to the main power supply. Even though the power is off, you will have some slight amount of current in, and in the end it will end up discharging the batteries, which is something that can lead to some frustration. With this simple device here, this eliminates that entirely, and this is something that I've been incorporating on my newer builds, and I've also been retrofitting all of my older builds with this system for the same exact reasons. This unit here, like I mentioned, was purchased off of Amazon.com. The link is listed below in case anyone wants to acquire one for their builds. This little bit of equipment here, by the way, is absolutely mandatory, and I just can't recommend it enough. Why this is relevant to bring up all this information again is because of the independent need for charging the batteries. With the way the unit was originally wired, this cutoff over here was simply used to disconnect the batteries while hooked up in series to the main power supply, and this was done via, of course, the red line. This system worked extremely well, but the one problem was with the independent charging. Obviously, since the batteries are hooked up in series, you're not going to be able to charge them independently, and they would only be able to be charged as one complete set. In order to add this independent charging feature, I needed to do some slight rewiring to the system that we have here, and I'll be touching upon that because it resulted in this mess of wires. But although it looks pretty messy, it is going to get cleaned up. However, this is the opportunity that I want to take in order to just illustrate how all the wires are connected. So the first change involves, of course, the battery kill switch. Like I stated before, originally this was just used to break the red lead that plugged into the tank's main power outlet that we have right here. In order to do the independent charging, what I needed to modify was with this setup. Rather than going ahead and keeping it the way it was, this gave me the opportunity to add the perfect location to cut the power into half. With the way this is hooked up now is that I simply just changed one of the leads and have it, instead of having going to the main power, it now acts as the jumper cable that connects the two batteries together. If the system is off, like the way you see it here, the batteries are not connected to each other, ergo they're now separate 12 volt power and you can charge them independently. Also, because they're no longer connected to each other, as well as no longer connected to the power supply, you're no longer going to have the battery drain. So this right here serves two functions without adding any more complexity in terms of other switches and other sort of gizmos that are required if I was to keep it with the configuration that I had it before. First thing you need to note is that the switch here is set to the off position. And here I have my battery charger. I'm using my older NoCo Genius 24 and 12 volt battery charger. I've used this system on several of my other tanks that are in my collection, and it works pretty well. Although this system is old now and they don't produce this unit anymore, however, NoCo does have a direct replacement for this system that is compatible with the battery setup that I have here. More information on that will follow, and this is something, of course, I am going to supply with the tank when it comes time to handing it off to the customer. However, for the purposes of this video here, the unit is plugged in, as you can see from the main power cord, or I should say the power light over there. Here's the jack. Now I'm going to go ahead and plug it into the respective batteries. First I'm going to start with this one over here. It just plugs right in, no switch or any other type of extra complexity is necessary. Just plug it in, and as you can see, it's set for 12 volt lithium ion battery, and the charger is going to start doing its thing. If I go ahead and unplug this and patch it into the other battery, the exact same thing will happen, only this time it's charging the other battery completely separate. Let me go ahead and unplug the charger. With the charger disconnected, I'm now going to go ahead and turn on the power. Currently the tank is off, but as soon as I rotate this knob to green, now the power is patched in, and if I hit the button over here, as you can see, the tank is now live. With this sorted out, the next thing I'm going to address are to undo these fasteners and mount on these rubber protective covers. I've mentioned these in a few other videos for really good reason. These are highly recommended, not just if you're working on an Armortek like this model over here, but any large-scale radio-controlled model, or just really anything in general. If you're using these type of batteries, these protective covers are really, really much of a lifesaver. It may seem remote, but it's more common than you may think, where you can have a piece of metal or a wire of some flavor or another accidentally make contact with some of the leads, causing a short out, and will just lead to nothing but problems. So to avoid any of those headaches, these things here are a godsend. These units here I actually purchased off of eBay. I have the link listed below in the video description. They're really affordable and again are worth every penny. Aside from the protective covers, you'll see that the instrument panel here has also been going through some changes. You'll see that I'm going to take this unit actually apart so that I can drill out these sections over here. These are for some of the various switches that are going to be added to this unit for some of the other functions that this model will be getting. Namely, we have this square over here for the smoke system. That's the stock Armortek switch that's going to be used, and it's a square type format. This larger hole here is actually going to be where the recharge jacks are going to be sticking out, so you could fish them out and charge the tank. These two switches here are for some of the other amenities, like the refueling pump, as well as the fan control system that is going to be mounted again as the model progresses. One feature that I'm going to omit off of this build here that was found on my older generation builds was the main light kill switch. On my older builds, of course, all of my tanks have remote lighting where you hit a little button on the radio and the lights activate. Well, in case you accidentally nudge the lever on the radio but you don't want to run the tank with the lights on, there was a main kill switch here, so that would be prevented. However, in practice, that just really wasn't ever proven to be a thing. So rather than going through the extra work and extra complexity of having a kill switch here found on the dash, I just went ahead and just phased that system out entirely. So this model here is just going to exclusively have the light control feature done and controlled via the radio and nothing else. Jumping back into the hull brings us to the amplifier unit, and this was another bit of equipment that needs to have been changed or revised compared to the original location that was mentioned a few videos ago. In an earlier video, I mentioned that the amp was going to be mounted vertically along the sponson over here, right next to the battery, with this nice little custom-made bracket. The unit was able to be mounted in a nice, strong manner and actually did the job very well. Unfortunately, it had to have been changed because of the rotation motor found on the top deck. With the top deck in hand, you can see exactly how far down the rotation motor descends, and as well as its size and mounting location. Well, this is going to be kind of funny because I recently made a video on the T34 about this, and that is when you're building these models, you really have to factor that little bit of equipment in, otherwise it could cause some problems with the remainder of your interior layout. And well, that's exactly what happened with this one. When I had the unit mounted directly to the sponson, it held it in place in a nice strong manner, but it was going to make contact with that large descending motor that I just showed. A few of my fans are going to probably be scratching your head and say, but John, I've seen a video where you had the turret rotating and, you know, the deck was on the model and it worked out just fine. And the answer to that is, well, yes, and very observant of you, but you have to keep in mind that when I was filming that video, the amplifier unit was not mounted in its location. At the time, it was running around loose so that I could connect the remainder of the plugs in order to get the sound system in an operational manner. Well, because of that, when I went ahead and tested the top deck, it fit on just fine, but when I went to remount it in place, I ran into an issue. Needless to say, the amplifier unit was going to have to be relocated. Now, I had an idea to mount it vertically, or I should say horizontally, right here between the hull, spanning these two sections of the sponson, in a format basically just like this. This seemed like it was going to be a really good idea, and I was actually in the process of fabricating all of the aluminum bits in order to facilitate that, but unfortunately, when I went ahead and mounted on the main control board, I ran into a problem where the amplifier unit was making contact with the power shutoff box. So I guess maybe if I shimmy it a little bit to the left, it will clear this, but then guess what? It's going to make contact with that motor that I just mentioned before on the top deck. However, as it turns out, there is still a nice bit of real estate left untouched found on the lower hull here, and that is this area here in the front of the hull. When I was designing the subfloor, I gave it some extra material over here in order to mount on some kind of accessory or some other bits of equipment. However, with the size of the King Tiger's lower hull, it fits the amplifier unit absolutely perfectly. It goes right in between the motors without making contact with either the motor or their wires. The subfloor itself is fully supported, so when the unit is mounted to the Lexan, it's not going to flex or bounce when the model is in operation. And also, with the way I have the power supply module bridging the top portion over here between the two sponsons, you have plenty of vertical space on the inside here where, again, it's not going to make contact with the other bits of equipment. So obviously this is going to be a really good location to secure this unit. However, I did have to make one slight modification to the wiring. If I take the unit out, you can see these 4 wires that I have over here. These, of course, connect the amplifier unit to the 2 speakers. The kit does supply you with the wires, but they are a bit on the shorter end and are not going to be able to reach from the speakers around the hull over here and all the way back to the front in order to plug into the amp. So these wires here were fabricated. They're just a extension of sorts with the male and female leads connected to them, and then they just plug into their appropriate locations. The next thing I need to do is fabricate 2 sets of columns in order to mount the unit in place where it will be able to secure firmly to the subfloor, but again, have enough clearance and access to get to that volume control knob. And here's the interior now with many of those modifications and features that have been added. Plus, at this point here, you're going to start seeing the interior clean up to a condition that's, well, more representable compared to the way it was found on earlier update videos for this project. Let's go ahead and start this from rear to front. Here we have the batteries, and since the last scene, you'll notice that the rubber protective cups have been added for the same reasons that I mentioned before. The wires have all been strapped into their locations, which also helps clean up the overall interior layout compared to what we saw earlier. Moving forward takes to the amplifier unit, and since the previous scene, it has been mounted in place, and that's facilitated with this fastener that we have right over here. At the moment, the unit is connected to the power supply via the appropriate cord. However, it is not patched into the remaining of the RC equipment, namely the speed control and the auxiliary control. That's controlled by this octopus of wires that we have here on either side, and these are going to be the next thing I'm going to be contending with in order to finish off the sound system. However, like I stated though, the sound system is currently live, so if I turn the tank's power on, you should hear some pops coming out of the speakers right over here. Those 4 pops indicate that the power is getting into the sound system, and it is working accordingly. Once the thing is patched into the RC equipment, I will then be able to trigger the system with the radio, and you'll be able to hear the engine noises, as well as some of the other sound effects that are found on the Benedetti sound card. Moving up brings us to the main power supply module, but more importantly, the instrument panel. Here you can see the instrument panel really starting to take shape. On this side over here, we have the 2 recharge jacks. You can pull these out further if desired. However, with the way the access is done on this vehicle, where you remove that front panel that I touched upon a couple videos earlier, you're not going to really need to pull them out too much, and you have easy access to both of these charging units with the top little plate removed. Right next to the charge jacks, we have a switch. This one here is the main cutoff switch for the smoke system. The smoke system at this point has been patched into the tank's RC systems. Kind of hard to see with this octopus of wires over here, but basically the smoke system emerges out of their units, run along this portion here of the vehicle, and they enter into this motor via 2 little jacks. This is all as per the Armortek kit, and they connect very quickly and very easily. Back to the switch, this is the kit supplied switch. However, an extension wire was needed to have been fabricated in order to maneuver the wire along the inner portion of the hull and bring it up to the area on the bow section that we have here. The switch is very nicely done. It has this little rubber protective coating on it, and it's more than enough for the job at hand. This same type of system has been used on several other of the Armortek kits that have been released over the years, and it's one that does work pretty well. Directly next to the 2 recharge jacks, we have 2 more holes for switches. These are going to be for controlling several of the other features that are going to be added to this model, but more information on that is to follow in the next video update. Moving to the opposite side of the control panel takes this little terminal brick here. This little piece is spliced into the Armortek system that's used to power up the smoke system, which you can see from this plug that runs along the sponson and connects to the appropriate systems. The reason why this was done was because with the way the Armortek systems are designed, or I should say were designed in the past. I'm not sure if the new generations have this type of setup, but on the older ones, you have enough output jacks here in order to just connect the power supply to the kit supplied functions, like the sound and the turret rotation, the motors, things like that, which does make for a very simplistic setup. However, if you want to deviate from this stock system and add more features and functions to them, but you don't want to add more batteries and just keep the, or I should say just patch it into the power supply module, you will need to splice into one of 2 different ports. One of which is the smoke system, like I used over here, and the other is for the sound system. If you're adding a lot of functions to your model that are extra, you can actually patch into both and everything will work accordingly. With this terminal block, I can now power the other accessories like the lights, the fans, as well as also the refueling pumps, which are going to be the topic of the next video. But with this setup here, no extra soldering is really required. I just run the wires to this location over here, loosen these screws, insert the appropriate wires to their locations, and then just tighten them down. It's a very simple way to add more functions, and it also cuts down on the amount of soldering that you are going to have to utilize when building a model like this. With those remaining cables tucked back into the vehicle, you can see exactly what the unit's going to look like once the top deck gets added. Because the amplifier unit was moved towards the middle section, the turret rotation motor is completely uninhibited and makes no contact with any of the interior functions. As you can see, I just dropped the top deck directly where it needs to be, and you can see the layout in better view. The batteries are directly below the turret, and for this model here, this is going to be okay. On the turrets on the later generation Armortek tanks, they don't have anything that really descends into the lower hull. Because of this, you can have the batteries mounted right here in the center, and not only does it balance the model pretty well by keeping the batteries at this point, but it also allows easy access. I just remove the turret, and the batteries are right there in case any maintenance, for whatever reason, needs to be made to them. Aside from securing on the power supply module, as well as housing the various switches that this model is going to need, I'm also using this setup here to secure on some animation servos. The servo that we see over here is connected to the bow machine gun, and like I mentioned in an earlier video, I went ahead and modified this kit in order to have the bow machine gun be able to pivot. Well, with the servo added, the system is now complete and it's ready to go. I'm not going to go too much in depth on how I was able to rig this system because basically I discussed that in more depth in that previous video, and I recommend checking it out. However, as you can see, the servo itself is now secured to the plate, and this is facilitated via these 4 fasteners, which do a fantastic job in keeping everything where it needs to be. Some individuals like to use adhesives to mount servos in place, and I have done this in the past. However, fasteners are just probably the best route in my opinion. And if you have the facility to mount on the servo using fasteners, well, you know, why not? As for the connecting rod itself, this is custom made. It's all soldered together. These clevis mounts here are, I believe, from Hobbico or Great Plains specifically. And then I went ahead and made this custom little connecting rod here just by soldering it to some brass. The unit is at the appropriate shape, and if I go ahead and pivot the servo, you can see how the unit is actuated. Aside from the bow machine gun pivoting system, another system that is going to be found on this plate over here involves this servo. In the last project update video, I mentioned that this tank will have the animation of the pivoting periscope found on the driver section. In that video, I mentioned the modification that I made to the kit components that we have here, but now you can see exactly how they flesh out. In order to facilitate the unit pivoting, I went ahead and fabricated this brass control arm system. It's all made from just sections of brass rod and some brass strip, and of course everything is soldered together to ensure strength and to ensure that the piece is nice and durable. On this portion over here, we have the servo connecting arm, and it's going to go ahead and connect to the servo that is found right here on the control board. With the top deck in place and with the clevis secured, or I should say positioned onto the servo, you can see how the unit is going to operate. However, there is one warning I want to point out, and that involves the clevis that we have here. You see, with the way the servos are designed, you put the clevis into its appropriate location, and then you have this retention screw that gets tightened in place and keeps everything where it needs to be. For this servo over here, I'm not going to be utilizing the retention screw. The reason why involves the top deck. Like I just showcased, the clevis itself is connected to the top deck. So when you take the top deck off, the clevis is going to come with it. Obviously the servo is not, because it's fastened securely to the control panel. If for whatever reason you need to take the top deck off of the model, the very first thing you need to do is remove the access panel that's found in this location, and then you can go ahead and pop the clevis that's found on this servo. Once this is done, you can then remove the top deck without breaking any other appendages that are connected to it. It's because of this reason is why I'm not going to be utilizing the securing fastener. You see, it's actually twofold. First, without the fastener in place, it makes it really easy to get in here to remove the clevis. And the second reason is for really as a safety feature. This is the type of function that you are going to forget and you are going to not remember when it comes time to removing the top deck, say down the road, or maybe if this tank ever changes hands or whatever. Because of that, if the unit is firmly connected and secured to the servo, when you go to take the top deck off, you're just going to bend and possibly damage the pivoting function. With the unit not screwed on, if you need to take the top deck off and it's still connected, the clevis will just simply pop off of the servo before any serious damage or any damage can occur. The mounting screw itself is not really necessary. With the amount of grip that's found on the servo pivoting arm itself, as well as with the clevis, it actually does a pretty good job in keeping it in place with just friction alone. However, of course, I need to mention this, if you are working on an RC airplane or an RC submarine, yeah, you want to put that little retention screw in place. That's just, you know, nuts. However, for something as really trivial like a small little pivoting animation like you see on this model here, not having the screw in place is something that is completely acceptable. Aside from all of the mechanical systems that I touched upon in this video, I also wanted to mention some detail fittings. In the previous video, I hinted that I had some components en route from the printer, and by the next video, I was going to show them off. And well, you can't exactly call me a liar because here we have the components on the table now. What you're looking at here is the new East Coast Armory 1/6 scale King Tiger rear fuel tank set. All of the components here are 3D printed. However, what you see here is not the full set. The full set is going to include a cast rubber gasket, which is found in this section over here, and it bridges the gap between the fuel tank and the top deck, and really it prevents any sort of leakage which can occur and can possibly lead to a fire hazard. Another thing that's absent on the table at this time is the box frame that both of these units will sit in, and that is how the straps actually secure everything in place. However, even though the remainder of the set is not here yet, we can still go over the parts that are present on this table. Starting with the main fuel tank, the fuel tank itself is first a hollow printing, and this is also true for the oil tank that I'll touch upon in a moment. Moving to the outside, you can see all of the details that are present on the printing, namely the X crimps that are found on the two ends, as well as the indent, which is also present on the real units. On the top portion here, we have the flange detailing present, as well as the locking mechanism cutouts that are for the main cap. I also want to mention that at this point here, this fuel tank is actually a pre-production sample. The production ones are going to be slightly different with the height of the unit, making them more prototypical and making them fit better in the King Tiger engine bay. However, for this build over here, the components that you see here are going to be more than suffice. From the rear fuel tank, now takes to the secondary tank, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is used for the coolant. However, if I am mistaken, feel free to mention in the comment section listed below. The tank itself is a hollow 3D printing, like I mentioned before, and it also has all of its surface details present, from the dome head rivets found on the top, these small little plugs, as well as the provisions for mounting on the other fittings that I'm going to touch upon in a moment. On the back portion here, we have the mounting bracket, along with two of these integrally printed on fasteners. The tank itself has a nice little shape to it, it's a bit unique. And on the main filler spout here, you can see that all of the details are present, including the indented nature of the locking mechanism, as well as the locking mechanism tabs themselves. From the smaller tank brings us to the remainder of the parts that I have printed, namely the mounting straps. These here, of course, are for the fuel tank that I mentioned before, and you can see all the details that are found on their surface. The straps have both the shape that's required to wrap around the fuel tank, but you can also see the turnbuckle strap detailing that is present. This includes both the overflap nature of the strap, along with their rivets, and all of the small little fasteners that are found on the turnbuckles themselves. Aside from these straps, you also have the main filler spout for the fuel tank, and you can see the lock mechanism in better light. The last runner to mention involves the fittings that are used for the smaller tank that I mentioned before. Starting with the largest part, we have here this elbow with a hose clamp that is fitted on. The hose clamp details are all present, including the straps as well as the small little fasteners that are found on the top portions. On the side portion here, we have two other smaller fittings which are used to connect to some plumbing, which is going to need to be fabricated and installed into the engine bay. And of course, on the very opposite end, we have here the filler cap that is for the top spout. The filler cap does have the appropriate geometry that is found on this piece, and just like with the other filler cap, it does have its little locking tabs that are integrally printed on. With the way the set is designed, it is intended to be fully functional in case you want to model the piece, either having the cap on or off, or you may want to do something special with these like I have intended, but sadly this is something I'm going to discuss once these are fitted to the vehicle. More information on that, of course, is to follow. Well, with this work out of the way, this now frees up the interior so that I can proceed with the other auxiliary functions, which I already touched upon in this video. Plus, it's really good to see the interior starting to clean up and look more representable compared to the hot mess that I've had going on in this model now for a little while. So it's definitely a step in the right direction. In the next video update, I want to have the fuel systems fully mounted, as well as start cracking into the turret functions, namely the gun elevation system. Don't be surprised if a test drive of this model is to follow, but again, this is something that you guys are all going to have to look forward to in the next video or two updates. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek King Tiger heavy tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/6 scale project update videos like this fellow over here, or the other smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of this particular model that have been posted all the way since the project start and are always continuously being updated as the build progresses. On the Facebook page, you'll also find many photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been showcased on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to go to eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks again, and I'll be catching you all again on the next one. Take care.